Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Powerless Podcast. In this episode, I talked to Rayyvana, who is a disability rights advocate, Twitch partner, contributor to the Young Turks, and co-host of the Taking the L Pod, as well as a streamer on, I think I said this already, but a streamer on Twitch. Rayyvana and I get into what got her started into politics, a lot of different things involving the ongoing escalation of violence, ethnic cleansing and genocide, and the Gaza Strip against Palestinians by the Israeli government. Chicago's response, as they were the first city in the United States, or the first city of this size, to openly call for a ceasefire by the local government. We get into that. We get into a couple of current events issues involving both the ongoing insanity that is Twitter run by Elon Musk. We get into some of the various articles that really both are perplexing from a financial advisor that wrote about her getting duped out of $50,000, as well as the continuation of articles that come out routinely that kind of vilify spending habits of millennials and Gen Zers as things get more expensive and as we don't have as much purchasing power and all those different things. We get into a bunch of different stuff like that, as well as talk a little bit about disability rights advocacy and a host of other topics. So it was great that Rayyvana came on with me to do this. I really appreciate her time. It was definitely a great episode, so I hope you all check it out. Before we get into the episode, as a reminder, you can just find the podcast on all social media platforms at The Powerless Pod. It's everywhere. You can find us on Patreon. It's $2.50 a month. So definitely go over there if you listen routinely and you want to support the show, support me, using things that I use to edit this and put this together. It definitely helps out a bunch to keep the show going. So I really appreciate those people that already do that. And last but not least, as I just referenced, earlier with the conversation Rayyvana and I have, I do encourage people still, as I know this is well over 100 days in. This is 4 months into the ongoing violence that's happening in the Gaza Strip, as well as escalating of violence in the West Bank. The last reported numbers were over 36,000 purported killed, a majority of those civilians, and a vast plurality being women and children. So go to ceasefiretoday.com. That's where you can find places to pressure politicians, to find protests near you, to find ways you can donate, and all those different things to really apply whatever pressure we can as individuals, whether you're in the United States, the UK, or Canada. I believe GazaStrong.com is also another one for people outside of those areas. But a Google search away, you can probably find something if none of these avenues have something specific to where you live. But please consider doing that. It takes a few seconds of your time to use these templates. If you want to use templates, if you want to call, if you want to use your own words, but definitely use all these avenues. So go to ceasefiretoday.com, go to GazaStrong.com, and just make sure to have your voice heard, because our tax dollars are supporting this, our politicians are openly supporting this, and it's getting to an unprecedented level of violence against civilians. I guess I should say this too. We say it in the episode, but make sure to follow Rayyvana on Twitter at Rayyvana. That's RAYYVANATTV. You can also follow her on Twitch. She streams there pretty routinely. She said she's going to get back into that more often, and that's twitch.tv/Rayyvana. So make sure to follow her there. Go check out what she does with political commentary and all those different things. Definitely a great person to follow on social media as well. So check it out. All right, I am here with Rayyvana, who is, I'll just read off your bio here real quick. You have listed as a disability rights advocate, which I absolutely love as someone who's a special education teacher. I love
Nice.
reading that from somebody. Contributor for the Young Turks, co-host of Taking the L Pod, and of course a Twitch streamer as well. I kind of mentioned this briefly right before we hit recording, but I really appreciate you coming back on. Now that I have a new computer that won't, hopefully, knock on wood, die right in the middle of recording. But before we get going here, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. It was warmer here in Chicago today, so that put me in a good mood. It's supposed to be even warmer tomorrow, and considering how February is usually our worst month, I'm pretty ecstatic about that. So yeah, I'm feeling good.
Yeah, I'm just outside of Chicago, about an hour west. And while you and I both as sort of left wing people, whenever something's warm, like the doomer in me is like, it's not supposed to be like this, record
Right.
highs or whatever. But when I can take my dog outside, and it's like even in the morning before the sun's up, it's like 35 degrees in February as opposed to negative 30. I'll take it.
Right.
We'll take the positives where we can, right? Well, I appreciate you coming on. I thought it'd be good today to, I always like to dive in with people, whether it's with music or politics, just kind of where your origin was with your political influences, what got you to kind of doing political commentary or activism or journalism or anything in those veins in your life. And those things. Then I thought, if we have time, I send a few links over. They're things I saw you share as well. That are kind of in the current events, political discourse, zeitgeist. That we could get to if we have time. But since I know this isn't like a music based episode, but I'm always just curious when I bring on people that are, Twitch streamers or activists, journalists, whatever. I'm always just curious what people's different music tastes are. So kind of as a icebreaker here, what have you been listening to a lot lately? What are some of your favorite artists? Just kind of get going with that.
Yeah, so I honestly lately I've been listening to Blonded Radio because I just replayed GTA 5. But
Oh, nice, nice,
But,
hell yeah,
but
awesome.
yeah, Daft Punk, my favorite group of all time. I've been, putting on Discovery pretty much every time I go to the gym. Random Access Memories a little bit here and there too. But yeah, so a lot of house music, a lot of electronic music. Also have a really soft spot for classic rock. My dad was a professional musician.
Oh no shit.
That was yeah, it was awesome. He played classic rock music in the Chicago area and a lot of bars and stuff. But so yeah, growing up, he'd always have the classic rock stations playing, and he'd like let the song play for a second. He'd turn the radio off and then quiz me and make me tell him like the name of the band, the name of the song, the name of the album. So I have a whole endless knowledge of
Yeah.
classic rock music.
That's funny. I had on Jen, who is like Big Nasty on Twitter a couple of weeks back, who's a member of the CPUSA, and she said the same. For I mean, I don't think she said anything about a family member being a professional musician, but like when we went into music, it was all about like the Monkees and the Beatles and classic rock and all that. So I guess there's got to be something to just growing up with that, and I guess getting into politics. I guess
Yeah.
not that any of that music's political whatsoever. Usually, it's about partying or
Right.
literally written about rock and roll, but there we go. That's funny too that your dad had you do that, because now that's like I think it's New York Times has like that Wordle game. They also have one that's like the equivalent of that for music that you
Yeah.
hear. I don't know if you've heard of that, but like I don't remember what it's called. But I listen to such niche music, I would flub it so bad. But I know that they like play like a second of a song, and you have to try to guess it, and you get like six guesses. Same with Wordle or whatever. So I guess your dad was doing that before
Right.
that was even like a thing that somebody could monetize on like a major news platform. So there you go. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, he
Um,
was, harassing his daughter, while dropping her off at high school while making her
yeah,
listen to fucking Aerosmith and
yeah, yeah,
Boston, but
yeah. Everyone's favorite. Everyone's favorite when they're like 16 to 18 years old is listening to their dad's classic rock music, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
but that's hey, Daft Punk, that is not a bad one to go off of. I used to my friends and I played a lot of like heavy music in college and high school, like metal and hard rock and stuff like that. But we would always sing jokingly in one of the bands that I was in when we go play a show, around the world, which is literally that same line over and
Yeah,
over again. And it was like we would just talk about how that was whenever we'd go to write music, like that was the song we'd use for inspiration, as if you could get any lyrical inspiration whatsoever. But it's just funny.
right. It's a
But thanks
banger,
for
it's a banger.
it is a banger. You don't need like a thesaurus for lyrics. Sometimes you got a good beat, and you just let it rip, right? So that's
Right.
great. Thanks for going over that. But before we I mean I figure to start off here, I know for the last, I don't know how long exactly you've been at least a contributor for TYT, but I've seen you do Twitch streaming where you've had guests on. You've kind of done political discourse stuff. You have your own podcast you do fairly regularly. Where did and I would like to at some point get into the disability rights I cannot talk today, advocacy, because that's just really interesting for me on a professional and personal level. But I guess in general, where did your interest in politics come from for you? What, if you can find various starting points or growth for that for you, did that come from anything you grew up with? Was that like a college thing? Just kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So, growing up in a low income neighborhood in a low income family, underfunded school district, politics is just something that feels like it's really forced upon you from a young
Yeah.
age where you might not recognize it as politics, but like being acutely aware of, what your family is lacking and like the
Hmm.
material needs that are not being met at such a young age. I didn't realize necessarily how that's not a common experience for people until I went away to college. So I guess it sort of started there.
Hmm.
But when as far as getting more into politics, knowing the definitions of things, it really did start in college. I studied political science and history, and jokingly, and I always say this to other people who majored in the humanities, all my all my poli sci professors were neoliberals, and all my history professors were communists. So I actually feel like I got a lot more of my political education from my history courses than the other way around. But so yeah, that, and then I found, I really Bernie's message really resonated with me in 2016, less so because I was 18 and not paying attention as much as I
Right.
maybe should have. But in 2020, 2019, during the primary, I was door knocking for Bernie. But I think my first one actually was getting involved in the 2018 Illinois gubernatorial election,
Oh yeah.
for JB Pritzker, our big boy governor. um, who I think has done a really good job. But so yeah, it really started there, and then I found the Young Turks in 2020 when I was getting involved with the Bernie campaign, or 2019, I suppose. And I joke because I used to listen to the show and I would pause it and I would say, oh, this is what I would say if I was there. And now I get to actually say my opinions on the show all the time, which is such a bizarre, but I'm very grateful for the experience. But yeah, so as far as my career, I suppose, goes in law school during the pandemic, there wasn't really a lot to do. And your first year of law school, you're not supposed to work. And that was my first time ever not working while being a student, since I was like 15. And I was bored. And also, I needed
Yeah.
money. So
Right.
I just started streaming because all my friends would tell me, you should, you're always bothering us about your political thoughts. You should just put it out on the internet for an audience who actually gives a fuck about what you were trying to
Instead
talk
of
about.
us, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Stop bothering us. Go tell someone who wants to listen. So it started like that. And then I found I got, involved with TYT from my streaming. Yeah, and it's just been a really good time. And then obviously I have the podcast that has nothing to do with politics, though. It's mostly my friend and I just talking about our misadventures on the blue line.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say there's a few times I've listened to it here and there. There was one that I heard, but it's just where like life can, like you said earlier, kind of with your early upbringing, but on a less serious level with your podcast, where like sometimes life just brings that stuff up because people are so
Hmm.
uh life is political, right? Like
Right.
in the sense of like I don't know, people that aren't into politics as much don't realize that like even like the most sort of everyday things, if you analyze them for more than a second, at least to me, they can come off as political, or at least like
Right.
your politics can come through on like everyday
Hmm.
conversations, right? Maybe that's because I don't sit there and talk about, I don't know, movies all day with people and prefer to talk about like history and communism or something or something like that,
Right.
right? But but no, that's really cool. I know when we, for anybody that we tried to record this couple weeks back, or God, a couple of months back, and it was when I realized I had to buy a new computer apparently. But you had referenced a little bit. This is where I can't believe I remember this because my memory is so bad. But you had referenced a little bit, and this is very topical for what's going on with what I would say is the most important foreign policy political action going on right now, which is of course the Israel onslaught in Gaza, and the horrendous things that are going on with Palestinians and things of that nature. And if I remember right, you had brought up that was another sort of really
Yeah.
um important aspect to kind of bringing into what your political ideology, for lack of a better word, is, right? Is that fair to say that that happened for you as well?
Oh, absolutely. So I had never, even when I was first sort of, getting into studying politics, I'd never really learned much about foreign policy. And I didn't know anything about, to my embarrassment at the time, when I was in, I think maybe my junior year of college, I really didn't know anything about what was going on in Gaza or the West Bank. And I had a friend who's Palestinian, and she asked me to go with her to a rally, a pro-Palestinian rally. I went to U of I on campus, and I agreed to go because I wanted to support her. I didn't really know anything about it, but I wanted to support her. And while I was there, the rally was, peaceful. They were standing outside the student union, and then a Zionist student group showed up and physically assaulted the Palestinian students. And then the next day, the school issued an apology and condemned the actions of the Palestinian students and apologized to the Zionist group. And that was the first time I had, ever recognized how pro-Israel and how anti-Palestinian all of our institutions here are in the United States. And I was like forced to confront that in like a very real way because I was there. I saw what happened. I know that the Zionist students didn't just agitate conflict. They didn't even just throw the first punches. They threw the only punches. They were the
Right.
only people who assaulted anyone that day. And the school coming down firmly in their side when there was no representatives from the school there at the time. There was no members of the administration. It was all students. It was just really despicable, and they didn't care to get to the heart of what happened or the issue. They just needed to come out on the Zionist side, and that was disgusting. And then from there on, this has been an issue that I've been really passionate about.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, that would be just even if you hadn't read too much on it, like you said, you were there more as just supporting your friend for clearly a cause that's very personally connected to them that they feel strongly about. And you just
Hmm.
want to be there for them, and then talk about just getting statistics aside, objectivity aside, just like getting hit in the face with the shock of like how fucking insane that is, right?
Yeah.
And that's like it's crazy because you said I'm bad at math here, but you said in 2016 you were about 18, so that means that would have been roughly like 2018, 2019 that happened for you, right around
Hmm.
there. Um, I should be able to add if I'm a teacher, but it's fine. But and it just goes to show, we're seeing some of those things now on campuses and all this discourse about things that people act like or the news acts like is something like new, like this kind of combative relationship between both um like you said, institutions or various like pro Zionist groups and peaceful Palestinian protests. And it's like, no, this has been going on like for as long as this issue has existed, basically, when it comes to structural entities versus just like people wanting to have their voices heard and have their advocacy heard, right? It's like
Hmm.
it's very interesting just to hear that from you from several years ago and how things now have escalated as far as I think probably people seeing those kinds of things happening. We just saw like the former IDF members at a campus. I think it was Columbia. I should
It
have
was
fact checked this,
Columbia,
but
yeah.
that like used like used
Chemical
base
weapons on the
chemical weapons
students.
on students. And it's like there's a lot of parallels there for far before this recent escalation of the violence and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, yeah, in your shoes I could see how that would be instantly like legitimately radicalizing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just a very realistic introduction into the politics of the conflict.
The last time I was going to have you on, we were going to talk about, there's a little bit of ambiguity, a little bit of apprehension on how, the Chicago mayor Brandon Johnson and local government in Chicago had kind of been handling the issue of Palestine. And while this is a few weeks back, I think this is important to bring up for somebody that lives in Chicago that is politically active. That it was great to see Chicago become the largest
Hmm.
government entity in the country that voted for pushing for a ceasefire. Um, and Brandon Johnson, to his credit, some people, were giving him, he was, giving him some valid criticism, I think, about how he had kind of talked about this at
Yeah.
certain points, but he was the deciding vote as well, along with the city council, to make that make that a reality that Chicago officially called for this. Do you kind of feel, as someone that's grown up in Chicago that is politically active, that, obviously we can get into how there's literally like I think it's the largest Palestinian population
Yeah.
is in Chicago in the entire United States. But what was your reaction to that? What's your reaction to, in general, of like all the activism and protests and demonstrations in Chicago, and just kind of what have you kind of noticed that from somebody that like has grown up there and lives there currently?
Yeah, so I'm very involved in the National Lawyers Guild doing legal observing. So for people who frequent protests, it's the people in the green hats who
Yeah,
document, police misconduct. They bail people out of jail, that sort of thing. Provide you with the phone numbers for the public defender's
yeah,
office. But so, it's been relentless here, right? The activism in support of Palestine. It's been wonderful to see, every single weekend there's been an action downtown. Half of all weekdays, I would say there's smaller actions around the city. Absolutely wonderful. I couldn't agree more that there was some lackluster response from Brandon Johnson initially, especially when we have such a massive Palestinian diaspora, and especially in the wake of the murder of the 6-year-old Palestinian American boy just
yeah,
outside the city, and all of the violence against Palestinians and Muslim Americans all around the country that was heightened, the increase in Islamophobia, when it really just seems like, and initially it came across that Brandon Johnson was this way too, although I think that he has, changed his rhetoric. But there was such a focus on an increase in anti Semitism, that nobody was talking about the increase in the Islamophobia, excuse me, despite the fact that it's been deadly on multiple
hmm,
occasions in the wake of this, and inspired by anti Muslim rhetoric that's being spewed in the news, by politicians, by Zionist organizations. But it was a huge step for the city to do this, and obviously, I think from the outside looking in, for anyone listening who's not from Chicago, they might have maybe a different view of our the way our city council is than the people here know, because it is very divided. We have a lot of socialist, communist, DSA backed members who are wonderful and they do great work. And we also have a lot of corporate pieces of shit who
yeah,
suck. They are landlords, they're assholes, terrible, horrible people, very hawkish on crime, very pro corporation. They're criminalizing the homeless. So seeing it pass and seeing Brandon Johnson being forced to step in and make that deciding vote, I think was important for people to see him voice his support for a ceasefire in that way. I will say I'm a little disappointed in some people on the left who have been dismissive of what this means, because the city of Chicago can't do more, right, than
right,
request a ceasefire, or then call for a ceasefire, and support the protesters in any way possible. And I'll say that they've been largely honestly, the police have behaved better involved in these protests than I've seen them in even some tiny actions around niche issues for the city. So it's been good to see that they've been reined in at least a little bit for the time being.
yeah,
But right, this is what Chicago can do. I mean, we're not a sovereign nation that can deny entry to people who are citizens of Israel, right? Like that's something
right,
that actual countries across the world could be doing, and I would call on them to do.
hmm,
But so this is very meaningful, especially for the huge Palestinian population here. I live in Albany Park. It has a huge Muslim population. It's where the Muslim community center is. I'm Muslim, my partner is Muslim, almost majority of my neighbors are Muslim, and the tensions had been high, and times were stressful, and there was a lot of anxiety, especially after the murder of, as I mentioned, of the 6-year-old, about potential attacks on the mosque here, on the mosques around the city. And the initial response was just to increase FBI presence, which if any group of
yeah,
Americans has a
great for
reason to, right.
yeah, great for Muslims. Yeah, yeah,
Right.
that's great for
the
the Muslim
history
community to have more FBI agents around mosques. Yeah, that's historically been great. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I
Uh,
think that Brandon Johnson has done a better job as of late in reassuring these members of the community that he's actually going to fight for them, that he cares about this issue. He's going to represent them, in their voice as the mayor. So things have been good. Things have been pretty good here, after a very rocky start.
Brandon Johnson and even some of the various various degrees of what people can call left or liberal or progressive or whatever moniker you want to throw out there. Um, it's a good example of, even if you like someone's overall policies. Like, I remember when I'm pretty like disillusioned overall from electoral politics for a lot of reasons I would bore people to death over. But like, there's no question that it matters more in city politics and local politics and
Yeah.
all those different things. And because in those instances, even when you have someone like Brendan Johnson, who I think, anybody that gets to that level of governance, there's a lot of chess that's played. There's a lot of
Hmm.
thinking about what various groups of various agendas or various ideologies or whatever you want to throw out there have in store for the city, but they can be pushed, right? And that's where you can see, like we were just talking about earlier, and what I was initially going to talk to you about a couple months ago was about his sort of wishy-washy stance on this. But what you see, I was only able to make it out to one of the larger protests in Chicago, because for me it's like an hour and 40-minute drive with
Yeah.
traffic to get there, and living in the middle of the cornfield, there's that. I think I might be the only person standing on the corner over here doing that, but I think when I was there, it was like 25,000 people came out, like,
Yeah.
shut down. There's been various times of shutting down Lakeshore Drive. And I think the difference is where you can look at, especially locally, where electoral politics do matter, is, he is able to be pushed and also probably has overall personally the right beliefs, just depends on where the winds are shifting overall with the public sentiment. But
Right.
I couldn't imagine like someone like Lightfoot, right?
Yeah,
Respond.
no.
Yeah, I see the laughing, right? Yeah, right. I could not imagine her handling this any way other than like the worst way possible. And to people outside of a place like Chicago, those are both quote unquote Democrats, and yet it's just where it shows that primary politics and local organizing and activism and elections, in the regard of mayoral election as an example,
Yeah.
makes a big difference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And for Brandon Johnson to be elected after, first announcing he was going to run, polling in at like 2%,
Uh-huh.
and then, defeating the very moneyed, corporate backed opponent he faced in the runoff election. Just great to see. Yeah. No, and, as someone who door knocked for him, to see that he overwhelmingly won in the poorest areas of the city, the most diverse areas of the city that everyone was saying would never vote for him because he's soft on crime. Just nice to be able to laugh at those fucking assholes from Naperville and give them a big fuck you.
Yeah, because yeah, the people living in like gentrified areas or Naperville or whatever, like, because they know what the fuck Chicago needs, right? Like,
Right.
that's, but they sure, yeah, they're the people that you hear talking the loudest whenever a mayoral election comes around. I mean, you know
Right.
better than I do living there. It's ridiculous, but yeah, that's a tale as old as time when it comes to elections, right? But that's great. It's good to see that Chicago's kind of been, despite what a lot of people outside of the state are certainly abroad, like, think of Chicago in a lot of ways that I could go into for forever on that topic as well. It's great to see, like, that it's kind of the setting the example of what big entities should and can be doing to at least call for a ceasefire and maybe tell the more federal electorate to like wake the fuck up and do something about this, right? So that's great.
Right.
um so going from there, I guess you brought it up a little bit earlier, and I just want to get into this before we get into some of these current events topics real quick. I just shared you a couple articles, but um you said you started streaming, getting into working with TYT after the fact around 2020 or so, you said, right?
Yeah.
But you also had listed, at least like I said in your bios on socials and stuff, of being a disability rights advocate. Where's that side of things come from for you, and how did that kind of become important for you?
Yeah, so I also used to teach special education.
Oh, no kidding. Awesome.
I was working for Park District, and I was a one-on-one for an autistic boy for the first like 4 years I was
Yeah.
working, and that was great. And then in college I was working full-time as a teacher's assistant in a school specifically for children with disabilities, behavioral disabilities. And I'm disabled as well. So then when I started law school and I was trying to figure out what area of law I wanted to go into, I took a clerkship working with a disability rights organization and a nonprofit and their legal team. And I was only supposed to stay there for a semester, and I stayed there for 3 years doing
Awesome.
advocacy for low income people with disabilities who needed representation, mostly in housing discrimination cases. So, wrongful evictions, writing a lot of reasonable accommodation requests on their behalf. I got to deal with so many fucking landlords during my time there. But yeah, no, it was really wonderful experience. And like, it's a lot of people are sort of dissuaded in law school from going into nonprofit work or public interest work because it doesn't pay well, but God,
All
it
right.
does make you feel good.
Yeah, I mean, especially working because I'm on the other side of it. As I said, I'm a educator and case manager, and a lot of times, this is where with you both having a legal background and saying that have obviously worked it with disability rights. I think you would identify with this. Where when I started doing that part of the job, which college does not prepare teachers for as much as you would think whatsoever. When parents ask questions or
Yeah.
various entities ask questions on like legal questions of when a kid gets out of school and like looking into what the funding is like and the loopholes for
Mhm.
adults with disabilities once they're out of the public school system. um and it just is like it's really such an important thing that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about as much, but it like affects such a huge portion of the population and certainly the most marginalized. But is there in your work in that, or just kind of having knowledge on these things in that vein, um is there one or two things you can think of when it comes to people that have left or progressive political beliefs should really think about as being involved in when it comes to having, like on the ground political activism, for lack of a better word, I'm kind of saying?
Maybe. So I guess one thing that I think that well-meaning people on the left tend to do is infantilize disabled populations as like unable to participate in direct action, which is historically not accurate at all. I mean,
Hmm.
looking at the history of disability civil rights in this country, it is a history of civil disobedience. It is a history of direct action. The reason that the Chicago bus system was made accessible was because disabled people stood outside of where the buses, load and unload, and they refused to get off the street, so the buses couldn't get out, so they couldn't.
Right.
And they also did a sit-in around City Hall, and it was very violent because the city was trying to break through the sit-in. They were locking arms, but they weren't budging, and so that was how a lot of uh, you know disability rights were achieved here in Chicago. And also, federally, it's not a tale of passive activism and like some heroic federal government coming in to, lift these people out of their oppression, right? I mean, one example that comes to mind is the crawl up the Capitol steps, where people who had mobility disabilities went to the Capitol and literally crawled up the steps to, protest inaccessible public accommodations for disabled people, people with mobility disabilities. So, I think that nice takeaway for people on the left would be don't infantilize these people. Yes, your actions should be as accessible as possible, but don't pretend like disabled people are unable to participate in them because they are not. But also, I would just recommend for everybody, always mask up when you can, because anyone who's immunocompromised, we can make their alleviate their burden a little bit by masking when we go in public, so that they aren't forced to stay indoors because you feel uncomfortable putting a mask on for a couple hours a day.
Yeah, that's something, I guess is a little off track here, but you brought up a good point there of just like, and it should be something that is kind of a no-brainer for people that are, progressive or socialist, communist, left in general. You talk about collective action. That's like what the whole kind of concept of like left-wing
Hmm.
politics are supposed to be. Um, and yet, and the pandemic, I think, was such a sort of a litmus test in a
Yeah.
lot of ways for the reality of that, right? Where like, all of a sudden when you know people that kind of view themselves in those same veins when it comes to just the most minor collective action, and I'm not shitting on a bunch of people, but you get what I'm saying, like
Hmm.
all of a sudden, like it doesn't matter as much for a given protest or a given
Yeah.
political function, or just an overall viewpoint of like, I don't know. It was just incredible to see the dismissiveness of all these different things when it comes to just like immunocompromised people, or like I said, people that I work with that are the most, you know, when it comes to health stuff, the most like marginalized and the most where the virus or like a pandemic or some sort of communicable disease would affect them the most, right?
Yeah.
And it's a stark reminder of like inclusivity is not just like this sort of like term to throw out there loosely. It really does matter when it comes to like making the world a collectively better place, or your community a collectively better place, to just think about those things. And at the same time, like you just pointed to, and I love that you said that, that's the thing that I think about the most, is like, don't infantilize people, don't treat them like they have any less, substance to society, or substance to political action, or substance to,
Right.
your community, just because whether they have a cognitive disability, or a health issue, or a physical disability, or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
It's like that means nothing. It's like the counterpoint to those people that it doesn't fit with this when you know what you're talking about, but to like the everyday person, is like, think about how many people view as like, you know a what a lot of people would view as like, someone that's like a high intellectual, or a high, has like a graduate PhD level degree from like an Ivy League school, and how they contribute nothing to society, or actively
Right.
make things worse. And
Right.
it's like, on the flip side of things, people that you view as not having the same sort of value, it's like you're just completely wrong. Like, those
Right.
things you pointed out are just such a perfect example of just like hardcore activism that really made a, tangible difference, right? Thanks for going. I just never get to talk to anybody else that knows anything about those things. I really appreciate you going over that. I just had a couple of articles I thought would be cool to look at here before I go, if that's all right. First one, I actually was looking at right before I kind of updated these things in the invite I sent you, was about the sort of, which you and I are, as Twitter users, would know pretty well about this already. We can get into how ridiculous this is, but the
Oh,
article
you're
from
banned now, so
oh yeah, I haven't even talked
your
about that.
your
Yeah,
free
did
speech
you?
has been you've it's
Yeah,
been violated.
yeah, and the crazy part about that was it was from tweets from like 2014, like replies to friends that were like morbid jokes,
Yeah.
nothing that I would get quote unquote canceled for, or anything like that. Just kind
Right.
of like morbid things that you would say to your friend when you're having a beer or something. And it
Mhm.
was just, somebody had gone, it was right after I did an episode with Juniper, on
Mhm.
Twitter, and I was, the only thing I could think of was some right wing weirdo saw my account, search something, and then just like
Ah.
flagged a bunch of stuff, and I got suspended. But whatever, I guess I'm too cool for Twitter. But at any rate, I'm not allowed on Twitter anymore, really. But bots are, and that's a big thing that came out from an article from Matt Binder this week that I sent over, that I saw you shared as well, so you saw it. Was that there was a majority of traffic from Elon Musk, X, formerly Twitter, may have been fake during the Super Bowl, and it goes on to talk about how up to the traffic going to other sites. So this isn't like the amount of traffic that was physically on Twitter, but the amount of traffic coming from X to advertising client websites was up to 76%, where other places it was as low as 2% for like TikTok, 2% for Facebook. And then at the very end of the article, it does talk about that he said of the visits from X uh, uh, the month of January, it was up to 31.82% of that traffic was determined to be fake. So I know maybe I'm crazy because I've seen this a lot more, but it's become kind of a bit for people that use Twitter a lot, that, there's those kind of spaces of I'm not going to say the words, but, like
Yeah.
the my whatever in bio or whatever else, that like
Right.
bots have run rampant. Things are able to have like blue checks there, all that kind of stuff. I guess this is just in general, both we could talk about this specific article, or as someone that uses Twitter, as a lot of political commentators do, what have you noticed over the, Elon Musk taking over in general, that this is kind of a microcosm of how it's going compared to how he has promoted himself as handling it?
I mean, it's really hysterical when you think about it, because his whole shtick around, uh, ramping up Twitter Blue, and I don't know what they're calling it now, X Premium, maybe.
Premium or something, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was in order to fight the bots. He even floated the idea without mentioning it to the CEO beforehand, and catching her way off guard in a press conference, that he might make it paid for everybody if you want to tweet or reply to tweets or share things, which shouldn't end up happening. But again, this was all, he justified it as being in service of fighting the bots. Well, the bots just pay for Twitter Blue now, and their replies are boosted to the top under all the replies. I mean, the website's basically fucking unusable. Any viral tweet, all of the top replies are just bots. It's just bots, most of them porn bots or,
Hmm.
AI generating text. Like the replies are so clearly that's not a real person that it's fucking insane. And shout out to Matt Binder for the article. He stays on Elon's neck.
Yes, he
um,
does. He sure does.
but yeah, I mean, it's despicable how much higher a percent of bot interaction that is than the other major social media websites where he tout. And Twitter is tiny compared to, Instagram, compared to Facebook.
Hmm.
It has a fraction of the people on it that those websites do. I mean, fucking you Facebook is so ubiquitous all around the world, so
Yeah.
so it's crazy that this smaller social media site can't tackle this problem. And, it's just evidence that Elon Musk is a total hack and a fraud. And but the people who support him don't care, right? If he just tweets out a meme that he crops the name of the person who originally posted it out of, they'll all be in the replies with the crying, laughing face emoji, jerking off their favorite deadbeat dad.
Yeah, well, and it's really pathetic both for, he's pathetic in his own right being the
Yeah.
richest person, and I think he's still the richest person in the world. I don't follow that shit as much as, I think some other people might, but one of the richest people in the world that spends his whole time, you know, sitting on this site, like you said, ripping off memes from like 2015 that you
Right.
probably now see from like your boomer uncle on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
And the amount of, but it's crazy to me at this stage that there's still that many people that are sycophants. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because like maybe I always think my brain's garbage, but apparently I am a lot more well adjusted than a lot of these fuckers that are on there. I don't know. I don't like. Can you even comprehend how someone is still like that at this late stage? Like it's truly mind boggling.
It definitely is. I'll say he used to have the favor of like liberal media as the
Hmm.
guy who's gonna, fix climate change. He's gonna, put us all on renewable energy. We're all gonna be driving his electric vehicles. But it was just a facade, right? It was just the way he
Yeah.
was selling himself in the moment. And it didn't last because once there was, even a little bit of looking closer at that, it was revealed pretty quickly that no, this guy's just a hack. This guy doesn't really know what he's talking about. He's posted climate denial stuff. This guy who has made all his money by securing government subsidies for fucking renewable energy, and then here he is posting climate denialism.
Right, that's the other thing that like is especially crazy with that, and how I think he's like the biggest. I think it was probably Matt Binder that I heard say this not that long ago, where it's like he's the perfect encapsulation of someone who like whether it was there was like the one thing that happened that when COVID first hit that he was like
Oh, the
um
ventilators.
the ventilators, and also like just gonna put people back to work, and if he gets arrested he'll get arrested and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, and at the same time getting funneled into these like reactionary spaces where like you saw a guy that was nominally liberal that was like the darling liberal
Yeah.
billionaire. He was one of the good billionaires, right, in
Right.
2016, probably one of the ones that people were talking about. And to go from that to all of a sudden like hanging out with like Alex Jones and Vivek Ramaswamy and
Mhm.
doing these weird things with like Ron DeSantis and all this kind
Right.
of stuff.
Launching
And I
his presidential campaign in the most disastrous presidential campaign
Yeah,
launch maybe in American political history.
I would say that's very fair, right? And it's just like it's been truly um boggling to see like someone just like go down that hole like in front of the world, right? Like
Yeah.
one of the most famous people in the world, and like that's what you're showing the world is just how big of a dumbass you are. And part of
Right.
it is that like not to stay on this forever, but is that like Twitter's the first like business he owns that he is actually running. right?
Right.
Like he has other people running. He doesn't know shit about cars or rockets or renewable energy. He just pays other people to do that. This is the first one where it's like, this is all you got, man. And you're
Right.
really showing your whole ass, you know?
Right, absolutely. I will say though, to some extent that he was even able to brand himself as that, liberal darling. It is the fault of the liberal media for not being
Oh yeah.
more uh looking behind the curtain, I suppose, because he's a billionaire, right? At the end of the day,
Mhm.
he's a billionaire and his financial interests are always going to outweigh any interest he has in any sort of humanitarian project, right? And that's why he is the way that he is, because he cares about his bottom line more. Personally, I suppose he doesn't really give a shit about how much money Twitter is making the way he's running it into
No.
the ground. But that's just his hubris as a billionaire who doesn't see himself as being capable of anything wrong.
Yeah, and it does remind me, with like the sort of liberal space, and this is where you have to have like objectivity and some sort of like class consciousness, otherwise you get they get fooled by so many of these people. It's like it reminds me of when all of a sudden like Bill Gates several years ago was the one spearheading international distribution of vaccines and was
Right.
like the head of various summits for environmental action. And it's like the dude's buying like he's trying to like buy up all of these rights of these different
Right.
renewable energy like
Jeffrey Epstein's
innovations.
good friend, Bill Gates.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I think that was maybe what had people finally jump the shark, but it was like wha- it's like the sort of like at large liberal zeitgeist of media was just like who's the next like benevolent billionaire that we can act like is going to save us, and it's like I think it's probably boring policy and and
Right.
needing to read legislature and collective action, but like they just like look for the next
Right.
person and it always blows up in their face. And yeah, between Epstein for both of those people in various
Yeah,
ways, like it's like Jesus Christ, like when are they going to learn? And they don't, and so we'll see
never.
who they put up next, right? um for the antithesis of billionaires, the next article that I had sent over to you, which is we could just like scoff at this. I don't need to read through this very much, but it was the what was it? It was I want to almost pull up the tweet because the tweet was better, but I remember it went viral on Twitter because it talked about young adults are getting used to living on a financial cliff, and they said they're living for their spending is going to short term purchases. Oh, here it is. Yeah, short term purchases like groceries and vacations. The two
Right.
things young people spend all their money on, the groceries which you don't need and vacations which you don't need, very equatable things. When you saw this, what did you think about this?
I mean, I agree. I think that, when we go to the grocery store, we're prioritizing our toast and our avocados. And really, that's our own fault when we should be putting that money in our savings account. I mean, it's so ridiculous the way that these people write about subjects like this. And it really was reminiscent to me of all of the musings of these upper middle class, PMC writers for these outlets that write about retirement and how people of our generations need to accept that we're never going to be able to retire. And that's something we should be happy about. I was reading this, oh, Jesus Christ, this piece in The Economist by this woman who was saying that
I think I saw that same one. Yep,
yeah,
yep.
Warren
Yeah.
Buffett never retired. So why would you ever want to retire? And it was just the most absurd, thing ever. And the idea, it's just that they have to frame it as we mismanage our money, as opposed to the fact that prices are sky high, rent is totally unaffordable. Wages may have increased. That's sort of something that they don't talk enough about in this piece, is that yes, the number on the paper has gone up, but the purchasing power of that number has gone down. So
Yeah.
it might look at first glance like we are doing better financially, but also to pretend that, being able to go on vacation is some sort of luxury that should be unattainable for every American, that, if you take a vacation that you're uh, being irresponsible with your money, is fucking absurd and such a weirdly uniquely American idea. Because if you talk to a motherfucker in Europe, they're going on vacation for an entire month at minimum, and that's everybody.
Yeah. That's like a it's like a part of it's like a part of their like work contract, right?
Right.
Like, and it's a part of like their state stipulation for workers' rights. And these are not like socialist utopia or dystopia or whichever side of the spectrum you're on. Like countries, they're like for lack of a better word, set up like ours, just a little less stupid,
Right.
and it's yeah. It goes. It's so funny to me because you'll see an article like this or the one you're talking about come out, talk about that we should just accept we don't need to retire, and that's great. Or this one where we spend money on groceries and
Right.
going places, and then at the same time it'll talk about how millennials or Gen Z people are ruining the economy because we
Yeah.
don't buy enough stuff. So it's like, which I don't get it. Like
Yeah.
which one is it? I guess it's just that we're like you said, we're the problem with society, not that society as a whole is the
Right.
problem.
And
you
it's
know?
just so fucking infuriating to see like what you just mentioned, those comments about we're not making enough purchases, we're not purchasing enough real estate, we're not starting businesses, we're not buying vehicles. But the fact of the matter is we're not doing that because we're all drowning in debt. Like I have a negative $120,000 to my name right now. Of course, no one's gonna let me buy a fucking house. I can't buy a car. I wouldn't, but I can't start a business. These things
Mhm.
are just completely unattainable for me and so many other people that, but that's you literally cannot put that on us because we didn't create the system that we are all victims of now, right? That was set up outside of our control. And, we were told we need to go to college to get a job, and we did that. We had to take out a lot of debt to do that. And now we're just drowning in debt, and we're going to be, trying to pay that off until we die, and we will never pay it off.
And that's yeah that and but
It's the
that
American
doesn't
dream.
matter. That's yeah that's that's just some liberal bullshit. You're just making
Right.
that up. But no, but I know it's just so goofy. Like it's like every month or two some article like this has to come out. It's actually probably more than that, but at least one of these like gets blown up online, and you have to look at it and it's like, do these people just like, it's so funny that they say things like that, or especially the economist one you brought up, because it's like you are writing like an opinion piece once a week.
Right,
That's
that is your
not what we're
job.
yeah, that's not the same as someone working in a restaurant or at a warehouse, or
Yeah.
or even like like a bachelor's degree level job as like a teacher or an engineer or whatever else. It's like all those jobs have various pay levels, but you're like kicking your ass every week. Like
Right,
you're not sitting in your home on your laptop typing up an opinion piece to send
right.
out to one of the biggest news outlets in the world, and it's not the same. It's like,
Yeah.
shut the fuck up,
I mean, even if your job is just sending emails to the email man, like that is
Yeah,
soul sucking work, and no one wants to do that until the day they
great point.
die. We are
Uh-huh.
working so that eventually we can retire and we can like maybe for a few
Enjoy life a
fleeting
little
right.
bit.
Just
Yeah.
for a few fleeting moments, find some enjoyment in life. But the idea that, it's not only is it acceptable, it's good to have 80-year-olds working, in these manual labor jobs. Is
Well, sometimes I think these pieces come out more and more so that way we can justify having an 81-year-old president, but like
right,
that, I
yeah.
won't get into that discourse that's been talked about, to death. But yeah, I don't know, just fucking it's just I don't know why I still sit on these websites and still read news articles. I just feel like it just melts my brain.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
but every once in a while you get a real gem like the lady who got scammed out of $50,000
oh my
um
god.
in, in, in a phone call scam that was the FBI.
Did you deep dive that one? Did you like
Oh
look
yeah.
at yeah,
Oh,
it
it was
was
so good. It
I
was
do
so
have
good.
to appreciate the honesty a little bit
Right.
to like fully sit down, type this out. I think she also like spelled it out in a podcast. I didn't listen to that. I read it, but it was just like truly astounding that you're doing this. And I think she was like a financial
Financial advisor. She wrote a biweekly column in the economy section of the New York Times. That's the upper echelon, the top tier type of financial advice you're getting from the New York Times.
yeah, putting 50 grand in a shoebox to hand to the CIA. What
Yeah,
what a
undercover agent that
genius.
pulled up in a van in front of her house. I would kill myself before I tell anybody that that happened to me, honestly, though.
Yeah, I would change my name. I
Right,
would yeah, I would yeah. I mean, that was the disassociation there from like how that was going to be received, because I think like at least the tweets that I saw from her on that was like literally like, this could happen to anybody. It's going to
right,
happen more often to you. And it's like, I know scammers are getting a little bit better and we could
right.
talk about that. You could have a constructive conversation about that, but that's not what this
Right.
is. Like,
I mean, it's funny because like she tries to justify it by saying like Gen Z and millennials are actually very likely to fall for scams, more likely than the elderly, which is I don't think that's an accurate representation of that. I think young people are more likely to report that they were victims of a scam. They're more likely to recognize they were victims of a scam. But what she doesn't say is that young people, millennials and Gen Z, are most likely to fall victim of crypto scams, not of
Yeah.
a phone call from Amazon. Which, if you fall for a crypto scam, you're also an idiot. But if you pick up the phone and someone says they're from Amazon and they're going to transfer you to the FTC, and then they're going to transfer you to the FBI or CIA, I think it was, which is even
Yeah.
more outlandish because they don't operate inside the United States.
No.
What?
You you literally have to have you have to be working with another entity, like a domestic entity, for the
Right,
CIA to be able to work with it. Like there's so
right,
many moving parts out of that. A Google search away, or even
right.
just using your
Just
brain is
hang
like,
up the
holy shit.
phone. I'm sorry. I've just this has been plaguing my mind forever. She's trying
No,
to frame
it's
it as
fine.
this could happen to anyone, not me. I don't pick up the phone.
Yeah, no, like yeah, that's the other thing that she'd point. Like millennials and Gen Z. Like, have you seen millennials and Gen Z people with their phones? They don't answer phone calls. Like,
Right,
it's not going to be an issue.
right.
Uh, but God, yeah, that one was. I almost forgot about that one with how many things come out and like the
Yeah.
But God, that was one of the weirdest ones, just because of how confident she was in that whole reporting. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Uh,
think about her every day for the rest of my life.
yeah, I was gonna go over this last one I pulled up, but I don't think it really fits with what we've been talking about here lately too much. So that's a good note to end on. I think is just talking about the ridiculousness of a financial advisor from the New York Times getting scammed out of 50 grand from a pseudo CIA agent. So so thanks for going over all the stuff with me, Rayyvana. This has been great to have you on. I really appreciate your time. Why don't you go ahead and plug where people can find you, and find what you've got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me on. I'm glad we were able to make this work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad your computer's all good now. You got a new one, fresh computer, no
Yeah, yeah, it
issues.
won't die 3 times in the middle of trying to record something and make me feel like a complete asshole. Yeah, yeah.
No, it was fine. It literally wasn't a problem. I'm just glad that you got that fixed.
Yeah, I
But yeah,
appreciate that.
everyone can follow me on Twitter at Rayyvana TTV. As much as I talk shit about the app, I'll be there because I'm addicted. You can
Got to go
also
down with the ship. Yeah.
right, exactly. I'm gonna be like the band in Titanic.
Yeah.
Um, but also twitch.tv/Rayyvana. I haven't been streaming much lately, but I'm about to have a lot more time on my hands, so everyone can see me over there on weekdays. And you can also see my videos for Rebel HQ on their page on YouTube and on Facebook if you're anyone listening still uses Facebook.
Yeah. Yeah. So Rebel HQ, you already said all this stuff. I won't get it wrong here, but it also all be in the notes. And last thing I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot here
Okay.
is I always play a song at the end, music based podcast or not, and I always have the guests pick it. So go ahead and pick a song for me for us to play at the end of this.
Okay, well, we talked about it, so you should play Around the World.
All right. I was hoping you were going to pick that. I love that you picked that. All right. We're going to play Around the World from Daft Punk, one of my favorite songs.